Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to do my bracket predictions for the Western Region Summer Showdown Tournament. The Eastern Region will be coming out tomorrow, but for today we're going to go through the Western Region. I did not do my recap for last week. I didn't really get the opportunity to watch the games that closely at all, so I didn't really feel like doing a recap was something that really just felt like a logical, or just it wouldn't have really been something super good. So real quick, I'm just going to throw up my predictions from last week so you can just see them real quick. 1-1 big pick, 6-9 overall. I think not a very good week for me. It was a very bad week in predictions. I think this is my worst one of the season and my worst one in a while. A lot of upsets, a lot of things I did not expect to go the way they did. So we'll see what happens as we go into the tournament. Clearly this week I was off with a lot of things, so going into the tournament I'm sure we'll have some of those same issues. But with that out of the way, let's jump in and let's take a look at the tournament itself, the bracket we have for the Western region. So the 8 teams that will be playing in this tournament are, in no particular seeding order, the Washington Justice, Dallas Fuel, London Spitfire, Toronto Defiant, Vancouver Titans, San Francisco Shock, Florida Mayhem, and the Houston Outlaws. The notable outliers, of course, are the LA Gladiators and the Atlanta Reign, 2 teams that had great seasons by and large up until this point. The Gladiators especially. Neither of those teams making it, but the Vancouver Titans making it in for the first time this season. The Justice coming back after they missed the midseason madness. Spitfire getting that last spot in the tournament. So really interesting set of games we have here, some interesting teams. And then, like I said, Eastern Region will be tomorrow. Charge, Dragons, Fusion, Dynasty. So I'll talk about that tomorrow. But for now, let's dive in and let's take a look at this Western Region bracket. And so I'm just going to go in order of the matches. We start off with the Washington Justice taking on the Dallas Fuel. Now, this is an interesting one. The Dallas Fuel go into this tournament as the #1 overall seed. They choose to play the Washington Justice. And I don't really blame them for making that choice. The Justice are a very, unfortunately, one-dimensional team. They don't have the flexibility of any of the other teams in this tournament whatsoever, because they only have 5 players, realistically, that they can play. Yes, they technically have a 6th player who's like a staff member, but that doesn't really count. So the Fuel know that they can really kind of run more things that they want to against the Justice. I think the Fuel have looked like the best team in this tournament cycle so far. I was not of that impression until their win over the Shock, where they looked very, very good. Hanbin's Junker Queen has been really, really good. Sparkle has, I think, lost like 3 maps this tournament cycle. They've been very, very good. Edison is, I think, the biggest question mark for the Fuel. If he plays very, very well, this team is unstoppable. If he doesn't have those high-level performances, that is where the Fuel begin to kind of struggle a bit. The Justice, on the other hand, don't have any substitutions. Right? They can't make any changes. They can't really do anything about their roster if it doesn't look super good. Now, I think by and large, Decay has looked pretty solid. Assassin has been up and down. I think he's the biggest issue with this roster. His inconsistencies are the thing that could cost them the most. Kalios, I think, is pretty good. His statistics are some of the best in the region, if not the whole league, on Junker Queen. So he's looked pretty good. Krillin and Opener look fine, as do Chio and Fielder. So these are 2 teams I think are pretty good. The problem is, I think, consistency. Fuel are just consistently better than the Justice are. I by no means think the Justice are the worst team in the league or the region. I honestly don't even think they're the worst team in this tournament. If I'm being honest with you, I don't think that they are the weakest, but I think they are the most predictable. They're the easiest team to kind of figure out because they don't have those second dimensions. They are very one-dimensional. They don't have anything else to kind of go for them, so I think the Fuel will take this one. I'm going to say 3-1. They haven't 3-0'd anybody yet this tournament cycle, and I think that'll stick just because it can. And I think it'd be interesting to see if that carries over. I think the Fuel have looked better pretty significantly. Justice have had their struggles, so I think, to me, Fuel taking this one seems like the most logical answer. They've looked a lot better, and I don't see how the Justice take that one. Next, London Spitfire against the Toronto Defiant. Defiant playing in front of their home crowd in Toronto, first time ever for Overwatch League matches in the city of Toronto, in Canada in general. So that's going to be really cool to see. I think that is going to ultimately determine kind of what happens there at the end. When Dallas played in front of their home crowd back in the kickoff clash, I think it did help the Fuel out. To be fair, the Fuel were one of the best teams in the region at that point in time anyway, but I think most people didn't view them as better than the Shock. They're probably like the second best team in the region. I think it was between them and the Gladiators that people were kind of arguing about. And the Fuel looked really, really good in front of their home crowd. The Defiant don't have to travel, which means they probably also get to, assuming that they're close enough to where the matches are going to be played, they might be even staying in their normal homes or apartments, whatever it is. I don't know if they have a team house or apartments, which means they have access to probably their regular practice facility or potentially access to their regular practice facility. Maybe they don't. I don't know exactly what the rules are in terms of competitive advantage and fairness and stuff like that. But I think they probably are able to stay in their own rooms and sleep in their own beds, which is really, really nice. I know that doesn't seem like something that would be super important, but it is. The comfort of being able to kind of have that same ability to go through your normal routines, be in a place that you feel comfortable in, that you're used to being in, can help a lot. And I think the Spitfire themselves are a team that have been up and down. Yes, they did just beat the Defiant this past weekend in a somewhat surprising fashion, but I think that the Defiant are going to be in a better position as we go into their tournament in Toronto. This one's going to be close. I think it'll go the distance probably. I think both of these teams will show a decent look in this one. But I've been more impressed overall by Toronto. I don't think they looked great against the Spitfire from what I saw. But I do think that the Defiant have consistently been the better team in this tournament so far. I think the Defiant have been a little bit weak over their past couple of matches. I think they kind of slipped a bit as this tournament went on. But I still think they look good. I still think they're a very solid team. They beat the Gladiators. They beat the Rain. They lost to the Fuel and the Spitfire, both teams who made the tournament. So I think the Defiant are the better team right now. I think that they should be favored in this one. I think that as the home team, I think that they will have that kind of crowd advantage. They'll have that kind of fan base behind them. I think that will help elevate them to get a win over a Spitfire team. But I think it'll be close, 3-2 for the Defiant in this one. Next, the Vancouver Titans take on the San Francisco Shock. I think the Titans look pretty good. I think they've been up and down. They had a very good start. Obviously, they were 3-1, I think, at one point, or 2-1. It was 3-1. That's how they started off the tournament with wins over Paris, New York, and I don't remember the other team they beat. The Justice, right? So they went 3-1. Where they lost to the Defiant, and then they lost to the Uprising, and they lost to the Outlaws, and that kind of makes me think the Titans are definitely good, but they're not great. The loss of the the Uprising, I think, was pretty A reverse sweep is not really a good way to go out. I like the Titans. I think they're good, but the Shock are better. I think this one won't be particularly close. I think it should be a 3-0 in favor of the Shock. The Shock are just better. They lost one game this tournament cycle, and it was to the Fuel. What more can you really take away from this one? This is not a dig on the Titans, and we'll talk more about them later, of course, as they're not eliminated by this loss and move to the lower bracket, but the Shock are not the opponent you want to start off against if you're the Titans. It's just that simple. You'd rather have somebody else, and so having to face off against the Shock right off the bat, not my idea of a fun time, and so I think the Shock knocked the Titans down to the lower bracket pretty quickly on Thursday. Final match of this first round is the Florida Mayhem taking on the Houston Outlaws. I think that this one won't be particularly close. There was news that the Florida Mayhem are having issues getting Surmajed into Toronto because of visa issues. Presumably because he's from Saudi Arabia is what a lot of the commentary seems to be, is that there are some issues with that. Which are out of Surmajed and the Mayhem's control. Kind of ridiculous stuff, honestly, from Canada, if that's true. I don't really know what the full story is, so regardless, I don't really think it matters that much, though. I think it obviously would benefit the Mayhem. That's what they were running a lot of. But I don't really think the Mayhem are that good. Their wins in this tournament weren't against great teams. If I recall correctly, they beat New York and Paris. And I think they beat either Atlanta when Atlanta wasn't looking good, or or Boston. I don't remember exactly who their first win was against. But they didn't beat anybody good. They had the easiest final weekend of any team in the tournament. I don't think they look very good. Houston had some rough moments, of course, losing to New York. Definitely a low point for the Outlaws. They were poor showing against the London Spitfire. But their win over the Gladiators was very good. They looked very good their last couple of matches. They, dominant win over the Justice, dominant win over the Titans. I think the Outlaws are in a way better position. I don't think this is a particularly close series. I said before, I don't think the Justice are the weakest team in the tournament. I think it's the Mayhem. I don't like what the Mayhem have done. And then you lose Sir Majed, most likely, for this tournament. I like them even less. I don't feel great about the Mayhem. I don't feel confident in their team so far. And so for me, I got to go with the Outlaws winning this one in a pretty dominant fashion. I just think they look that much better right now than the Mayhem. Let's stick, though, with this upper bracket. Dallas Fuel, Toronto Defiant, or Toronto Defiant. They matched up once already in this tournament, and it was a 3-1 victory for the Dallas Fuel. I think the Fuel are the best team in this tournament still, but I think that the Defiant have shown a lot of reason to believe that they could have a good run here, and of course they have to play in Toronto in front of their home crowd, so they get that boost as well. I won't mention it again, but that is a thing that the Defiant have going for them. The Fuel, to me, though, are just better at pretty much every role. The exception is, I think the Defiant support line is the best in the region right now. In this meta, I think Chorong and Twilight are fantastic. They know exactly how to play around the Blades. They know exactly how to play around the big kind of ult usage from their enemy teams. They're fantastic. And I think that is a big thing that allows Hisu to succeed the way he does. And it's a big part of why I think Hoppa's having a good tournament, is because he has really good support from the rest of his team. When Aldo plays well, I think the Defiant are a very, very good team. And I could definitely see Chorong and Twilight causing an issue for this Fuel roster, being a pain for them, being something that the Fuel just can't quite crack and can't quite break. Defiant feel energized, they feel good, they play their strengths, they play well. I think the Defiant really are a dark horse team to win this tournament. I've been very impressed with them so far. I think it plays into their strengths very, very heavily. But the Fuel are so, so good. I think the Fuel will take this one. I will say it's a 3-2. It was a 3-1 last time. I'm going to say 3-2 this time because I think that the as good as the Defiant are, I think that they will be able to keep this one closer, but I think the Fuel are just better. Map picks are a big part of it. I think tournament matches, in theory, should be closer because of that, but to me, the Fuel take this one over the Defiant. Just based on what I've seen from them, I think the Fuel look better and they're the better team right now, so I think Fuel move on to the upper bracket finals, where they play the winner of the Shock Outlaws match. This is a tough one to call because I think the Shock are a very good team. I think they're very solid and they're a very, very talented team, and they're a very good roster, top to bottom. I don't think they necessarily have the same kind of overall firepower that a team like Dallas does, or even at times a team like Houston does. I think Houston, with both Merit and Pelican, are flashier on the DPS role than the Shock are outside of Proper. I don't think Kilo and Sam have many really big pop-off moments in the way that Pelican and Merit do, partially because they don't really need to because Proper is just that good. Tank-wise, Kaluge and Dante have both had pretty good performances. I think Dante has been a pretty good Junker Queen for the Outlaws, and Kaluge has been good, not incredible, but definitely solid and doesn't really struggle on the hero in the same way that someone like Reiner did. Support line for me is really where I think it's interesting because I don't love the Violet Finn support line, all things considered. I think that they've done a fantastic job this season compared to what I expected from them. They have greatly exceeded my expectations and outplayed my expectations. I think Lastro has had a very good season. I think Lep is a very good addition for the Outlaws. I don't think he's necessarily the most talented player, but I think he does round out this roster in the way that they want and need him to do because he is their Lucio player and he's a very important part of this team. I think that the Shock will win this one. I think they're the better team right now. I think the discrepancy between these two teams is probably close to the discrepancy between the Fuel and the Defiant, but I think ultimately the thing that really kind of divides these two teams and the things that will be the determining factor is I just think that the Outlaws support line is just not as flashy as we've seen from a lot of the other ones. I think that as long as Pelican and Merit play well, this team is fantastic, and they do very, very well when those two are on their best performance-wise. But when they're not performing up to kind of snuff, they have had a bit of struggles. Now, this tournament was rough for them because obviously Piggy departed in the trade of trading away Iris and getting creative and like weird internal stuff that I think caused some issues for this team. Was a bit of a hiccup for them, but I think they're good. But I think the Shock are just the better team right now, and I think they are the favorites to make it to the winners finals from this bottom half of the bracket. I just think that they seem better. So I'm going to say 3-1 Shock beating the Outlaws. Moving on to the lower bracket, Justice against the Spitfire. They played once in this tournament cycle, and it did go the way of the Justice. But obviously things like that can change. Teams can adjust and can evolve and adapt. And I think that the Spitfire of that point in time were not as good as the other, or I should say, they were not as good when they played the first time as they are now. I think the Spitfire have improved since then. They're not necessarily an elite team, in my opinion, but I think they've looked better. The Justice have been up and down. They've been hit or miss. They've had their moments. They've had their weaker moments. It's kind of like it's a tough one to call. But I think that the peaks of the Justice are much higher than the peaks of the Spitfire. The problem with the Justice now that they have gotten rid of Mag and Happy and Vigilante is that they don't have the same firepower and consistency that they have. Ironically, neither Vigilante, Mag, nor Happy made it to the Summer Showdown, so that is kind of funny to think about. But the Justice, I think that is one of the biggest issues. Now, I believe they beat London with their current lineup. I don't believe they had Mag, Happy, or Vigilante when they beat London. I believe it was just the 5-man roster they have now. Justice won that match. It wasn't particularly close, if I remember. It was like a 3-1 or 3-0. I don't remember exactly. Maybe it was a 3-2. I'm not 100% sure. But I think the Spitfire's performances really come down to how well they fare in the DPS matchup. It's about Assassin versus Backbone, I think, primarily. That really comes down. That's the big determining factor in who's going to win this match. Assassin's inconsistent. Backbone, pretty consistent, but I don't think he has the same highs as someone like Assassin does. And it's Sparker and Decay. Like, those two matchups are the big ones for this one. Because to me, Kalios versus Hod, or I guess I don't remember if it's Poco or Hadi. I really don't remember who they played them. I think it was Hadi. Is a that's a matchup that I think really is kind of either way. Support line wise, I feel like that's pretty even. I don't think either of these teams have a weak support line. I don't think either of them have an elite support line. Comes down to the DPS matchup. I think the Spitfire are more consistent in that matchup. I think the Justice are a little more flashy. I do think Kalios has shown a lot more promise on the Junker Queen when he's not dying. That is one of his biggest issues. He dies a lot. But I really like the Justice. I think they're going to take this one. I'm going to say it's a 3-2 win for the Justice over the Spitfire. I have not been super confident in the Spitfire so far this tournament. I don't think they've looked great. They look good. Winning in Toronto was a very big win. And I don't want to take that one for granted. Don't take it lightly. But the Justice looked better the last time these two teams played. And so I think that the Justice are the team that should take this one based on what we saw when they matched up previously. Vancouver Titans versus Florida Mayhem. I really don't think the Mayhem look all that great right now, and I think the Titans have a lot more kind of freedom on their side, right? They are playing in the country that they represent, not in the city they represent. It's a very far distance from Vancouver to Toronto, so they're traveling one of the furthest, I think, of all the teams in this tournament. I think the Shock are probably the furthest, but the Titans are certainly one of the teams traveling the furthest. And so to me, I look at the Titans, I look at what they've done, I look at kind of where they've been. I think they just look better. To me, Aspire matches up well against Hydron and Xe. I think Aspire's been fantastic. I think King on the Genji has been very, very good as well. He knows how to, really hurt the support lines, really break down the support lines. And that's the man's weakness. Their support line is not going to be as good without Sir Majed. The way they like to play is they like to play around Sir Majed. They don't have him at their disposal for this one, most likely. And so to me, the Titans should be the favorite in this one. And I'm going to say not particularly close. I'll give the Mayhem a map, but I think 3-1. And the Titans are just better right now than the Mayhem. In this meta, I feel better about the Titans. I like what the Titans have done more. And so I think the Mayhem are going to be on the outside looking in for this one. I don't think they're going to make a huge splash in this tournament. I just don't feel like they have a great team. They surprised me in the midseason madness, but I don't really see it happening in this one. Sticking with this lower bracket, let's do the Washington Justice Houston Outlaws matchup. These two teams played once already this tournament and it went the way of the Outlaws. Pretty one-sided affair, 3-0 win for the Outlaws. And I think they're going to do it again. I think they look better than the Justice right now. No hate on the Justice. Like I said, I picked the Justice to win this game. I don't think many people will. Outlaws look very good as long as Pelican and Merit play well, and they're very consistent. Right? They don't struggle very often. I think most of their struggles come from support and tank. It's such a big Genji meta, and Pelican's such a good Genji that I don't really have a ton of fears and concerns over how good the Outlaws are. I think they're very, very solid. I think they're going to be one of the better teams in this tournament. I think without the Gladiators and the Rain being here, that number 3 and number 4 kind of team is certainly up for grabs. I think Houston, Toronto, Vancouver, Washington, definitely the big ones fighting for that. But I think you have to look at Houston and Toronto as kind of the two teams in the driver's seat for that kind of 3-4 spot. Potential dark horses to take the tournament. Justice, to me, just don't have the firepower and the flexibility to really be that team. And so, to me, Outlaws take this one. I think they're pretty good, and I think that they should be expected to do very well in this tournament. Vancouver versus Toronto. 5-map banger last time they went head-to-head. Beginning of the tournament. So I'm going to say it's a pretty close one again. I won't say who I think is going to win right away, but I think these two teams match up pretty well against each other, or at least it's a tough matchup for these two teams. I think that one of the things you look at is that the Defiant really like to run Ashe. They're not a big Sojourn team in comparison to a lot of the other teams. Aspire Sojourn is very, very good. I think there's some maps where Sojourn is better than Ashe, some maps where Ashe is better, but the Defiant always really like to run Ashe. I think that's an exploitable thing if you're doing map picks. You can just pick maps where Sojourn is just better than Ashe. The sightlines for Ashe are not as good, or there's a lot of more ways around those sightlines that kind of hurt Ashe's ability to find a lot of impact. That's kind of the trick to beat the Defiant, is really kind of isolate and single out and play around the strengths of the Ashe and make those strengths kind of nullified. And you don't really have much you can do if you can't even really touch the Ashe. Or if the Ashe can't touch you, you're pretty good. So that's kind of how I feel like the series is going to go. It's going to be a lot about that. But I think the Defiant are better overall. And to me, it really comes down to the supports and Junker Queen. I think Hoppa's been a better Junker Queen so far than Mirror. I think he's looked better on the role. Chorong and Twilight are a fantastic support line. I think they will be great in this tournament. I think Moss has been good. I think Aztac has been good. But I really think Chorong and Twilight are the difference makers here. Aspire might be the best player in this match, based on what we've seen so far, but I think I have to give it to Toronto in this one. I think they've looked better. I think they're the more solid team right now, so I'm going to say a win for the Toronto Defiant in the battle for Canada. Before we do the losers bracket semifinals, let's do the upper bracket finals between the Dallas Fuel and the San Francisco Shock. It was a 4-map 3-1 win for the Dallas Fuel when they played on Friday. So who knows what we'll see this time around. I think Dallas is better right now, and I know it's going to be a close one for a lot of people. My problem with the Shock, and this is obviously the type of thing where it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think the problem with the Shock is that they are way too reliant on proper popping off to win games. I don't necessarily think that the rest of the roster is anywhere near the level of Proper, with how good Proper has been. Now, Proper is one of the best players in the league, arguably the MVP, probably the Rookie of the Year. He's an incredible player. So it's very rare that Proper doesn't pop off. And the team knows that they can just basically put resources into Proper, let Proper do whatever he wants, and they'll probably win games. But against a team like Dallas, I think that that's a lot harder to do because I think the Shock are a good enough team where in a lot of neutral matchups, a lot of like individual role matchups, the Shock are probably better against a lot of opponents. on enough rolls that you give the edge to the Shock. That's not really the case against the Fuel. Proper versus Sparkle, assuming it's a Genji matchup, I really don't think it's that far apart. I think a lot of people look at Proper as just so good, like he's the best in the world, like no one's even close. Sparkle's Genji is one of the top. I mean, the top 3 Genjis in the world right now might be, in no particular order, Sparkle, Proper, and Who Are You. Like, they have been so good on Genji so far this tournament cycle. Sparkle has dropped like 3 maps all tournament. He has looked untouchable at times. I think you have to give a lot of love to the Fuel, what they've been able to do so far there. Tank-wise, I'll take Hanbin over Kaluja any day of the week. I think Hanbin is the more consistent Junker Queen. I think he's looked a lot better on the role. I think Dallas' support line, relatively speaking, better than the support line for the Shock. And then when it comes to the hit scan DPS role between Edison and Finn, or Edison and Kilo, I think that Kilo's probably better, but I don't think it's that far apart. Edison, I think, is more inconsistent, but if Edison plays the way he did this most recent matchup, I think the Fuel should look pretty good in this one. So I think a lot of ways the Fuel are a better team on paper. It's just a matter of whether or not they can really get that going in this matchup. But they did a very good job against the Shock last time they played. It was a win for them. Map pick will allow the Shock to be a little bit more, they can play more into their strengths and the things that they favor. So I think it will be a close series. But I'm going to say the Fuel. I think the Fuel right now would look like the best team in the West. And I think there's a very real possibility they take this series against the Shock. Back to the lower bracket we go. Houston Outlaws take on the Toronto Defiant in my little bracket here. I don't know why this isn't moving. Come on, there we go. All right, Houston and Toronto. This one I think is a very interesting matchup. And I think it comes down to 2 main matchups and really factors that kind of will determine who does really well in this one. The first one is how much value can Pelican find against the backline for the Toronto Defiant. Charong Twilight, as I mentioned before, have done a very good job at kind of canceling out Genjis, stopping Genjis from getting a lot of value. It's a big thing they've done very well this tournament cycle. I think they're probably the best support line in this tournament right now in terms of just pure talent. The weaknesses of the Defiant are more in their tank line and in their flex DPS role. And so I think the big matchups are going to come down to the support line versus the Toronto support line versus Pelicans Genji. And the other side is going to be how much value Although can find. Because Although has been, I think, arguably the weakest or most inconsistent part of the Defiant. Hapa, to me, has been pretty good. He hasn't been incredible, hasn't been bad. He's been pretty good. He's good enough to kind of get you wins, which is a lot of, I think, the biggest kind of thing that the Defiant have been all season, is they've kind of been good enough to get you places, but they haven't necessarily been elite at any point in time. I think Merit versus Hisu is going to be a very back and forth battle. I think obviously both Hisu and Merit are comfortable on Ashe and Sojourn, but Hisu favors the Ashe and Merit favors the Sojourn a lot of the time. I think we'll see Sojourn maps and Ashe maps as the picks. I think that'll be a big thing. I think the series will go the distance. I think it'll probably be a 2-2, going to map 5 situation. So to me, it really does come down to those 2 big things, right? Although getting value against the Outlaw support line, which I don't think is necessarily as strong as the Defiant support line, but I think because Pelican is a better player than Although, he'll have more opportunities to get those big moments. And so can Although match some of those moments against Lastro, against Lep? That's what I'm really looking for in this one. I think it's a very close matchup. These are 2 very good teams. I think they're very consistent. I think the tournament will really kind of be these 2 teams fighting for that number 3 spot, maybe even an opportunity to get to the finals. I think Toronto getting to the finals would be awesome in front of their home crowd. The Fuel did it and then lost back in the kickoff clash. But this to me is a very interesting one. It's a very interesting matchup. It's a very fun matchup. But I think that the Outlaws are the better team right now. I think I've seen more from them. I think they have more flash to them. As much as I like the Defiant and what they've done so far, I think their support line's really, really good. I think the Defiant have to play so well on so many more roles because I think really the thing that comes down to this meta is if your DPS are really, 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 really good, you're going to be good. If your DPS are popping off, you're going to be playing pretty well. And Merit and Pelican have been really, really good. And I think pound for pound, Pelican's a better flex DPS and Merit's a better hit scan DPS. when you compare them to their counterparts in the Defiant. So to me, you have to go the Outlaws. I just think they look better right now. I think it'll be a close one. I think it's tough to go, to really say who for sure is the better team is tough. But right now, I would go with the Outlaws taking this one over the Toronto Defiant. So final two matches in this Western bracket. We have losers finals or lower bracket finals, elimination finals, whatever you want to call it. Outlaws versus Shock. This would be the best tournament performance for the Outlaws ever. They've never made a tournament finals before in their entire history, so this would be the closest. I guess technically 2018 Stage 1 would be the closest they've ever gotten so far, but this would be more impressive than that one. This, to me, is such a fascinating matchup because I think, once again, it comes down to DPS, right? I think that the Outlaws and Shock, I believe I already had them playing once above here, if I recall correctly. So this would be their first matchup. This would be a revenge game for the Outlaws, yes, if they were able to pull it out. So I won't kind of go into much detail because I already talked about this matchup. But I think the Shock are still better. I can see this one being closer than the previous one. Maybe it has that kind of factor of what you had the last time with the Fuel in the 2021 playoffs kind of dropping, keeping their eyes back on getting to the Dragons, and the rain kind of spoiled that from happening. Could happen here, but I don't really see it. I think this one goes the distance a bit, but I think the Shock are still the better team. Moving on to the finals, Dallas Fuel, San Francisco Shock. This will be their second time matching up, of course, already, so a lot of the same things I said before would still apply to this one. The Shock, having just at this point in time played a finals match, or potentially a grueling match against the Outlaws, does give the Fuel a bit more time to rest, kind of watch what's going on. We saw last time around that the Fuel Gladiators series was pretty close in the kickoff clash, and then the finals, when they rematched, was not close at all. I could see the same thing happening here. I could also see it being a very close matchup. I think that you have to really just kind of consider map picks. I think this series is going to be back and forth no matter what. I just cannot see this being a 4-0 if it is these two. Whoops, no, let me do that. I think it's a 4-0. I think no matter what happens, it's not a 4-0. I think these are two good teams. I think it's too good for it to go either way, one way or the other. I think it's just too good. But I still feel better about the Fuel right now. They beat the Shock the last time they played. I think the Shock are very, very good. I don't want to say that it's impossible, but I feel better about the Fuel than I do about the Shock. But beating a team 3 times in 10 days or whatever is really, really tough. And the Fuel getting 3 wins over the Shock, including their win last week, the win that they would have in the upper bracket finals, and then this game here would be an incredibly difficult gargantuan feat. I don't think the Shock are bad enough to, or inconsistent enough to lose to the Fuel 3 times. So I think one of these games will go the way of the Shock. I don't think they will lose all of them. The question is it the finals or is it this one? And honestly, I was very certain in my mind that the Fuel would win it, but I think Krusty is such a good head coach that as you play the same team multiple times, I think the matchup naturally changes. And a lot of the time, I feel as though we see teams do better their kind of second time they play a team in a tournament. We saw it last time around with the Dynasty beating the Dragons the second time around, but losing to them the first time around. We've seen it other times in the past. We didn't see it with the Gladiators versus the Fuel. They beat them both times they played them. But generally speaking, I feel like the second time two teams play, it goes better for the team that lost the first time around. So I'm going to give the Shock this one. It's a tough one. It's a close one. I think that they'll split whatever it ends up being. It'll be very, very close back and forth. But I feel like the Shock are the team to beat still in this tournament. As good as in the Fuel are, to me, a sustained long series, it just gets harder and harder to stop proper the longer a series goes. And so for me, I think I have to give this one to the Shock 4-3. Close one, I think, no matter what. I could see either team winning, but that to me is where this one goes. This wild bracket. I'm sure I'm very wrong. I'm pretty sure all of my brackets, every time I do these, are terrible, but it is what it is. Let me know down below who you think is going to win the Summer Showdown. If you think I'm an idiot or whatever, let me know down below. I'd love to hear from you, your opinions on what we have seen so far this season and this tournament cycle. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. Until next time, bye.